Good afternoon. My name is Paul Charnier. I'm the editorial page editor of the Day newspaper, and we welcome you to this week's Lunch with the Candidates. Today our candidates are from the 46th District of Norwich, and joining us in today's discussion are Representative Emmett Riley, the Democratic candidate, Republican Rob Dempsky, and our petitioning candidate Bonnie Hong. As with each of our discussions, do not have the candidates on a clock, but we will encourage them to be succinct and to provide an opportunity for all the candidates to comment on our various questions. If someone's talking unfairly and dominating the time, I will try to move the conversation along. And at the conclusion of our discussion, all the candidates will get a 1-minute chance to sum up. Joining me and asking questions are Claire Bissett, Day staff writer, who covers the city of Norwich for the Day, and Izaskun Laranetta, our deputy managing editor. And with that, we're going to go right to questions. And our first question is to Representative Riley. As vice chairman of the legislature's Public Health Committee, what have you done to address the opioid crisis and high overdose rates we've seen in Connecticut and in our area, and what more needs to be done?
Sure, certainly. Thank you for the question. As the vice chair of the Public Health Committee, this year we made historic legislation in requiring that doctors only prescribe prescription drugs up to 7 days. Normally it was a 30-day subscription, and now we've limited to a 7-day subscription. And we think that will help certainly reduce the attempts or the ability for someone to become so addicted to a strong painkiller. The opioid fight is something that's multifaceted. There certainly needs to be more in the realm of treatment and possibly behavioral treatment, so that individuals with a certain type of behavior may be more susceptible to becoming addicted. And if they are, then we can get them the treatment that they need.
Mr. Demsky, if your views on what might be done to address this crisis we've seen in our area and across the country.
Well, first, thanks for the opportunity. I think this is a great idea, and I hope that it works out. I'd like to start off with the legislation that Representative Riley just mentioned. I think that's a great step to take. 7 days as opposed to 30 not only helps control the addiction level for the individual patient, but a lot of times, I'm sure that we all know through conversation, et cetera, somebody is prescribed a medication, they don't use all of it, it's extra, where does it go? Well, sometimes, unfortunately, that medication gets sold, and that gets out into the market and contributes to the problem. So I think that that's another ancillary benefit to that legislation. So I think that that's great. I think that another very helpful way to determine how we're going to attack this problem is to look at what has worked in other states. I'll probably come back to this point several times, the whole concept of federalism and states' rights. When states have strong governments and are able to govern themselves without a lot of federal government restrictions, they're able to come up with innovative solutions to problems that present themselves. Now, this opioid addiction in general, with aside from what had happened in past years in Willimantic, really hasn't been a national attention story, but this is becoming one, and it's something that we as a state don't necessarily have a ton of experience in dealing with. So I think that using other states is a valuable resource, and that's something that we should certainly do, and try to make the best decisions available with our limited budgetary options that are going to be available to us, with coming into $170 billion shortfall, $170 million shortfall. Those options are going to be, questionable at best. So finding ways to get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, will be key in dealing with the issue.
And Ms. Hong.
Yes. I think the legislation that was passed was a good first step, but the problem is that there's still a real big push to use opiates in general for pain control. They are addicting. From personal experience, I know that over the last several months, I've been placed on codeine, morphine, oxycodone, all of which I basically tried not to take because for the prolonged period of pain that I happen to have shingles, so the prolonged period of pain would have made me addicted to any one of those three had I taken them the way they were being prescribed. The fact that the medical marijuana restrictions for pain control in the state of Connecticut are so narrow, to me is one concern, and I think that definitely has to be expanded. There is really good pain control using medical marijuana that's been proven, so I think that really has to be looked at carefully. Also, the treatment facilities for current addicts are well underfunded. There are many agencies that work on it, but most of them are underfunded, and I would like to kind of look at more of the treatment facilities and their success rates. But I think my last point very quickly would be what Rob made in talking about the fact that and particularly parents maybe have an issue where they were prescribed an opiate, they haven't used all of it. The fact that Norwich does have medication drop box at our police station is really critical, and I think most people don't recognize that it's right there. I think that when the doctors should be more aware that is an available drop-off point so that medications can be removed from the home by the family, given to their family doctors.
Thank you. Before we move on to another question, just following up on that, a couple of points are raised, starting with Representative Riley. When your opponents talked about balancing, at least one of your opponents talked about the cost of these expanded programs. If we need more beds, if we need more services, that costs money. So if you could maybe address that conundrum of the state's budget problem, weighed against the need to perhaps provide more services in this regard, and whether you think liberalizing the medical uses of marijuana is something that the state should consider. And Representative Riley.
So that's two parts to that question.
Right.
In the first part, government is available to provide services, and I think we as a state legislature are trying to provide the best services we can with the amount of money in the revenue that we have to provide those services. Is there a need for more beds in the detox facilities such as SCAD here in New London? I believe there is. At some points there are times when those beds are empty. I'd worked at SCAD for about 6 years, so I'm very acute and very knowledgeable about the situation that is at hand. There are times when those beds are not full. So there is a wave of back and forth between the need for the bed and the ability to provide the bed. If there is a chance, or if there is the ability for the legislature to provide more beds and provide more treatment, I believe that as a whole the General Assembly will. As far as the medical marijuana and the expansion of the treatment use for medical marijuana, I'm in full support of that. We have just expanded it to, I believe, about 17 different afflictions that an individual can have that they can use medical marijuana. And this year we were proud to do it as well for children, and having parents as guardian or a guardian be able to administer the marijuana to a child as well.
And any further comment from Mr. Demsky?
Yeah, one thing that I forgot to mention is, we talk about the addiction, and sure, some people unfortunately get addicted because they've been prescribed drugs. Other people are out seeking, that opioid high, and for those people who become addicted through that route, I think that we have to ask the question: why are they choosing to do that? Why are they making that choice to start taking these drugs and to become addicted? And one of the reasons that you can point to is jobs. I think that it's not necessarily not necessarily coincidental that that this addiction problem is really strongly manifesting in a time when the job situation in the state and the overall economy has trended the way that it has. So I think that we can do a lot to help ourselves in that regard by turning the economy of the state around and creating an environment that's more conducive to businesses flourishing and prospering and creating those jobs, so that people have better choices to make rather than to seek out these highs. So.
And kind of last word, your opinion on medical marijuana. Have you supported it, and would you consider expanding it if indeed you support?
Yeah, the research that I've done, on my own has shown that medical marijuana in specific cases for specific diseases and afflictions can be very helpful. And most recently, I read that it has. There are studies that show that has an effect in actually helping to bring people off of opioid addiction. So that's coming at it from a different angle than Ms. Hong had mentioned, but I think it's important to point out nonetheless. So that could be an additional use that the legislature could look at permitting, rather than methadone, using the cannabinoids to help people come off of and detox from the heroin and opioid addiction.
And if you have something further, I want to give you kind of last chance.
Just to expand on what he just said, it is by empirical information, not by blind studies. Physicians will tell you that it has helped many addicted patients once they've started on medical marijuana. It has absolutely reduced the amount that they needed initially, and I've had a number of previous addicts actually speak to me about how it was because they were able to get on the medical marijuana that they were able to get off of their opiates. But I think that I would expand, I personally, because I absolutely do believe that the prohibition against marijuana is it's unfounded. Certainly it is not a Class 1 drug, but I think that also adding to our budget, if marijuana were just legalized in the state, it would have some impact on our budget revenues. Having spoken to several of the marijuana dispensaries, they would find it a very easy transition to go from just dispensing medical marijuana and dispensing legalized marijuana, collecting the tax revenues from that, because there are no tax revenues to the state for any medical marijuana. So I think just as a budgetary a look at our budget and how marijuana legalized in the state could also have an impact.
We actually had that on a list of questions, but since it came up, we might as well get everyone on the record now. Some of our surrounding states seem to be taking a serious look at legalizing marijuana for recreational use. We've heard from the candidate Hong, Representative Riley. Do you have an opinion on that?
I would support it. Obviously, not having seen any sort of legislation, I would refrain from saying how I would support it, but I would if it was done correctly. The federal government this summer did obviously not choose to make it a lesser classification, and that will be difficult. I think the difficulties are, how do you transfer this money? This money is federal money. It's federally deposited money, and you can't take that money and put it in a bank. You have to do certain things. How do you go about it? And with the federal government not making it a lower class substance, it makes it difficult. I am in support of it. I would suggest I have visited 2 of the facilities here in eastern Connecticut that distribute marijuana. I have 2 friends that are on it for MS, and they are in complete agreement that this has made their quality of life a whole lot better. It's a much less severe drug than an opioid, and I just don't understand why, in a correct medical setting, that this can't be expanded and used for personal use in your own home as well.
Sure.
Mr. Demsky.
Right,
Yeah.
and so one of the important points about the act that Representative Riley was talking about, where the federal government failed to remove marijuana as a Schedule I drug, that has ramifications down through the state. So if the state decided that, for instance, it wanted to allow recreational use of marijuana, that's going to necessitate people growing it, selling it, et cetera. And the federal government could still at any time step in and choose to exercise that federal law that has it as a Schedule I drug. So there's a potential conflict there. Like I said, I hope I'm not going to sound like a broken record, but I probably will. But when you talk about federalism and seeing what other states are able to do, we've already got a few states out there who, like Colorado, have been the first through the door in legalizing this recreationally. So I would, before voting for recreational use in this state, like to see several years of information come out of these other states before we open that door and start to deal with unintended consequences that may arise from legalizing it in that fashion. And again, I want to underscore that I am fully in favor of legalizing it for medical use, because I think that the statistics and the information bear out that has positive effects and very few negative. But with regard to recreational, I would want to hold off on that and wait for some more information
and just
to
to
come out.
clarify
in the real
before we
situation.
move on, it sounds like you'd like the federal government to get out of the way and let the states sort this out.
Yeah, for the most part, I'm very much in favor of strong state governments and returning federal government to what was designed as its limited role. The federal government's supposed to have specific enumerated powers, and they've gone well beyond that and have now taken control over the states in areas that they shouldn't have.
Okay.
If I could.
Very briefly.
Very briefly,
carry
because
some other territory.
I was just making my comment in response, but there have been a number of studies which I have copied from Colorado and from Washington that have shown their statistics for decrease in crime rate, especially in Colorado. They did not get the kind of windfall benefit to their budget that they were hoping for, but the other benefits that you had some concerns about have proven not to be true. It does not expand the use of narcotics or other drugs. It is not. It's not turning more people going from marijuana into harder drugs. It's being shown that it's not, and it has actually decreased their crime rate. So I'd be happy to share that with both of you.
All right. Well, I'm going to move on to the next question is from Claire Bissett, and it's to Mr. Demsky.
Okay, totally different type of subject. Norwich is working on a $144 million school restructuring plan, and their goal is to put it on the referendum ballot in 2017 locally. So that means they would need state approval for it, and they're estimating $87 million would be the state reimbursement level. Would you support that project specifically? And then what's your thoughts on local school project reimbursement? Because apparently it's coming up in a lot of towns in our area.
Mm-hmm. So specifically to the Norwich development, the information that I have from various sources is that is not necessarily the best use of taxpayer money, both locally and statewide. It could very well be a case of, because state money is potentially available, let's try to do this project. If you, it's the old axiom, if you tax something, you get less of it, you subsidize it, you get more. And this seems like it falls into the latter category. But what I would like to see happen in the state, quite frankly, is a hard look at a voucher system where you return the money back to the individual parents. They then shop around if they want to keep a child in local school, that's fine. If they want to have their child go to a vocational school, which I understand there are waiting lists to get into right now, opening that type of decision up to the market would necessitate that people would look at opening vocational schools, and filling that shortfall that the state on its own, with its own resources, because they fund the vocational school program at this stage, frankly, is probably not going to take a very hard look at. So, that's a longer term solution to the problem that you're talking about, but it's a route that I think that we should again take a hard look at going down, because everywhere that voucher programs have been instituted, they have been wildly popular with the parents who have children attending those schools, and the product of education that it's produced has been top notch. So, I don't see any reason why we couldn't follow that path.
Ms. Hong.
Okay, to the question. Yes, I would support it. But however, my personal view about the school system, I understand why they need to do this. There is a real need for something to be done for the Norwich school system. I personally feel that neighborhood schools are probably the best possible way you can educate your own child. However, our budgets, it's now 2016, we don't leave at recess or at lunch to go home and have lunch with mom. So there's a real need to have some way of centralizing our schools so that a lot of the duplicate services can be cut. You have an easier way of protecting all the children. So I understand why they're looking at having this one mega school for the community. I hate to call it a mega school, but that's actually what they're looking at. So, so I do support it because I think it's a smart financial step for the city in helping to eventually reduce the cost of our Board of Ed budget component. It would help reduce a lot of the duplicate services, but it's not one that I think is what I would have hoped for. However, I think it's the only solution that is really available to most large communities now.
And to Mr. Dempsky's point, that
Vouchers?
why not encourage school competition and empower parents and provide vouchers?
Having raised 3 children and having had to make the decision where my children were going to be educated, for the most part, yes, I wanted them in public school. I would not send them to, when they were in private school in their elementary grades. There was another personal reason why that decision was made. And because one of my children was there, I kept all 3 of them. But they all went to NFA. I have a very difficult time even imagining a public school system totally depleted of real resources, which is what happens when you have a voucher system.
All right, thank you. Representative Riley.
Sure. Obviously, this is a choice to be made by the citizens of Norwich in a referendum in 2017, as Claire said. And if they do choose to support it, I certainly would as well. And if I'm in the legislature, I'll work as hard as I can to make sure that money is provided to the city. The city of Norwich has a struggling school system in some regard right now. I mean, 70% of the students have free lunch or can apply for free lunch. We've got about 30 some odd different languages that are spoken in the school system, so it's very difficult to say that the change would be good or bad. But if it is something that the citizens of Norwich vote on in 2017, I would certainly help and work as hard as I can to make sure that money is provided by the state to build that different type of school system.
And since it was raised during our questioning, your position on vouchers and
I wouldn't support a voucher system. I think that would be too much of an overhaul of our education system at this point. I think obviously in the ruling that came out last week by Judge McCauser, the state of Connecticut really needs to look at how their education system is funded and what we can do to make sure that it is better funded for every individual kid, no matter where that child lives.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to give you a chance, Mr. Demsky, that the criticism you hear of the voucher system is that it depletes our public schools, particularly our urban schools. So if you could address that criticism you hear of the voucher idea.
Well, so to the last point raised about the recent court decision, with a voucher system, you don't have a judge stepping in and making a decision like that, because there isn't this complicated and quite frankly unintelligible system by which cities and municipalities are reimbursed from the state. The average voter looking at that, they don't want to get involved with even trying to figure out how that's calculated. And quite frankly, a lot of lawmakers, I don't think really have a full grasp of how that's handled, which leads you to a judge making a decision such as that. So if parents are allowed to make the decisions that they think best suit their children and are best for their future, then that's an individual decision made by those people and not subject to this municipality gets that. Oh, they're doing well over in this town, so they get less money. No, everybody gets what they get, and you open the market. And look, I'm not naive enough to think that there aren't going to be growing pains associated with a change like that. Of course they, pardon me, of course they're going to be. But in the end, in the final product, when people are allowed to make decisions for themselves with their money, I think that we end up overall with a better system, and we alleviate a lot of these concerns and questions.
Thank you. And the next question goes to Bonnie Hung.
I recently purchased a home from an older couple who were decided to leave the state and move down south because it was too expensive to live here. Their daughter, who's also, she's in her late 20s, she also moved down south before them. What do you tell people who are leaving Connecticut because it's too expensive to live here, and how do you fix it?
I always tell them I'm going to miss them. I'm not going anywhere, but it is a problem. And it's not just with people who can make the decision to sell their home to someone. We have a number of residents in Norwich, elderly. There are several just down the street from me. She's just recently made the decision. My husband was doing house calls to see her, and she just made the decision that she's going to have to just move. She didn't want to make the decision. Financially, she was left with nothing. The bank now owns more of the house than it is worth. She has pulled more equity out. She has to just abandon her home. The house across the street, the same thing happened. The family abandoned the home. They moved out. She's going to be living in an elderly complex. Because it is expensive, so that she can't pay the taxes and she can't keep the maintenance up on the house. That issue is created because of the high cost of our property taxes in Norwich. There are 78% of people that are renting in our community are living below the poverty line. These are people that are renting, okay? It is such a burden to help to continue to pay for the services that are essential in Norwich. The same issue is at the state level. You cannot continue, they're finding it difficult to continue to provide just even basic services for people. So they don't just move out of Norwich, they move out of Connecticut. Some of the things that I think...
If we could get to, so how do we, you having identified the problem? If you could,
that is the problem, and the problem is obviously our budgets. When we begin to talk about to me, what the real issue is, it is our budget, the state budget. And what are we going to do to correct the direction the state budget has gone in? I mean, we're now going through several years of depleting a rainy day fund. So next year is why any one of the three of us want to be in Hartford for next year when this comes crashing down is But I think that maybe all three of us think that there's a way to finally get out of this, and it is through the budget. You cannot continue to let corporations decide that they will only come to Connecticut when you give them $25, $30, $50 million of our bond money to help them relocate here, so that a year later, as Cigna did, when they decided not to enact Sustanet, brought Cigna back in with more of our bond money so that they could then turn around 1 year later and move their finance department to India. Every corporation has a real civic responsibility to maintain the services that they use in the state, both the infrastructure and the quality of life that they originally came here for. That, to me, is number one. The corporate giveaways and the corporate welfare in this state has to stop. The second thing that will impact the budget substantially is by increasing our minimum wage. This January, it finally comes up to $10.10 an hour. There's not one single person in this room, not one, that could live on $10.10 an hour if you worked a full-time job. It's not possible. So it not until the state decides, and it's not just going to be at the federal level. Individual states, New York has already done it. The minimum wage has to go up to at least $15 an hour, so it's a livable wage.
Just to be fair, I'm going to move it along. You raised two points you feel have to be addressed.
Sustanet was it was a real big point for the budget.
All right, thank you. Representative Riley, the issue that we're losing both many of our seniors and younger people are relocating out of Connecticut because of the expense of living here. If you could address that.
Sure, certainly. As far as seniors, I know many individuals that have moved south. They've put a lifetime of work here in the state of Connecticut. Obviously, New England weather is different than it is in the south. Winters can be somewhat more harsh. An individual of an older age does have more difficulty in moving around in the climate that we have during the winter months. So I can understand why individuals would move south in that regard. As far as younger students, I think there was something that came out in one of the local papers, The Current, this past week, that more grads from the University of Connecticut are in fact staying in Connecticut. So I'm not quite sure how many people of the younger age are moving out. And one of the things that the House Democrats has proposed is for first-time college grad buyers is lowering the taxes that they have to pay on buying a home for the first 3 years of their purchase. So that's an incentive that we've put forward, and we hopefully will be able to pass that this coming session. As far as the minimum wage, I can proudly say that I have voted twice to increase the minimum wage, and I will certainly do it again till we get to a point, probably much past $15 an hour, to have a livable wage for those individuals that work on a daily basis for 40 or 45 hours a week. It's unfair and not American for an individual to be able to work that amount of time and not be able to provide for themselves, let alone their family members.
Mr. Demsky.
So the question is, how do we stop people from feeling the need to move from the state?
Correct, and we've heard some ideas from your
Right.
opponents.
So that starts with spending originating in the General Assembly in Hartford. We passed the largest tax increase in the state's history, the second largest tax increase in the state's history. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And until we get serious about controlling the spending, we are going to continue to see the legislature look for quote-unquote creative ways to tax people in the state, mileage tax, putting the tolls on the highways, et cetera. If not, flat out trying to raise the income tax. So, 2 years ago when I ran, I had mentioned that I had heard about tolls being talked about being put in. And Representative Riley said he hadn't heard any such thing. And 2 months after the election, driving down the highway, what do I hear on the news? That's what we're talking about. So, until we control spending, you can tax until the cows come home. The nature of government is that it will find a way to spend that money. So that's where the problem needs to originate. Now, with regard to minimum wage, frankly, I think it's un-American for government to dictate to a private citizen what they must pay another individual. When you're talking about a wage of any kind, how is that transacted? It's two people or a person in a business agreeing on a job for a wage. Nobody's making anybody go to work for X amount of money. They freely enter into a contract, and the truth of the matter is, when you mandate what a company or an individual has to pay for a service, that job doesn't get created ultimately. Representative Riley said he'd like to see more than $15 an hour. I don't know how many minimum wage jobs are worth, I don't know, $17 an hour? What's the right figure? Why don't we just pay people $25 an hour? Why don't we pay them $50 an hour and call it a day?
Can you on the record for that?
And so, yeah, sure, go ahead. And the answer to the question is because at some point, you cannot sustain what you are mandating a company spend or an individual spend when they contract for services. Those jobs will not be created, and that's what we're talking about. We're losing jobs. We need to create jobs. We don't need to add what essentially is another tax on top of business. If you think about it in these terms, the legislature is taxing essentially everything that moves, and now they're looking to port more of a tax out onto private business by saying you must pay X amount to an individual for whatever job it is that they're getting into, and essentially pay them money that we would like to pay them, but we don't have in the budget. So you go ahead and shoulder that burden. That's not how we do things in this country. So you control spending so that you can ultimately reduce taxes, and you also need to take a look at regulations, which are in addition to the minimum wage, which you maybe classify as regulation, is an additional tax on business, because especially small businesses aren't typically able to bear the burden of these regulations that get put on them like large businesses are. So it's a prohibitive factor from them either entering the marketplace or staying in the marketplace. So those are the things that we need to take a look at in order to reverse the trend, create an economy in Connecticut that is pro-business and pro-job creation, and remove the incentive for people to want to leave the state and to stay here.
Want to give? We'll start with
Could I,
Ms. Hong, and I'll give
if
you.
I may, I want to.
I want to give you. Yeah, I will get back.
I want to make sure that it is known that I did not vote for those either one of those tax increases. I was one of 11 Democrats that did not vote for those tax increases.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
But Representative Riley did vote for the implementers for the budget. So whether he technically voted against the budget and the voted against the tax increase, he voted for the implementers. So it's
Is that the same thing?
it's the
Representative Riley?
same
In
thing.
fact,
You're voting to
ultimately
implement
the
it. You're not
Well,
standing up and
let's
saying
give him
no,
a
you
chance.
shouldn't.
If I could answer the question, I did vote against it, and there were provisions in that budget that were removed before those implementers took place.
Mrs. Hong, I want to give you a chance to. Mr. Demsky has said he considers raising the minimum wage counterproductive and that it may hurt job creation, and he sees the key problem as cutting government spending to keep people in Connecticut.
Well, I don't think you can cut much more than has been done this past year. It's absolutely devastated the state group homes, with the cuts to the social service agencies that are going to be expected to take over the care of these group home residents. They've also had all of their budgets cut. There is. I am never in favor of keeping people in poverty that actually makes slave workers out of American citizens. There is no opportunity to get out of poverty without at least some opportunity to do so. And you don't have that opportunity if all you're making is barely enough money. If you get food stamps and you get some housing assistance, you can barely make enough money on the minimum wage to survive. So you may be lucky enough not to know a single person who is doing exactly that today in Norwich. I know too many of them that work 2 and 3 jobs. None of that is American. And to think that people that fought years ago to make sure that children didn't have to work in this country, that a minimum wage was at least the minimum that a company can pay an individual for making them rich. That to me is not acceptable. That's not American, and that's not acceptable. So no,
Mr. Demsky, to be fair, certainly.
I just want to make sure that we all understand that minimum wage positions traditionally are entry-level positions, and they aren't designed to sustain. They aren't designed to sustain a family of 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, they're entry-level positions. They're positions where the employee comes in. Yes, they get a wage for what they do. They also gain work experience that they can then use to leverage their experience to get better employment that pays a better wage. You know, that's how the market economy works.
No,
so
it's not.
Well,
let me respond
No,
to that.
I'm going to
because
move it.
he's
I'm
not-
going to
All
move to another
because
question.
he's
If you want to weave it
absolutely
into a
wrong.
future, you can.
All right,
But
he's wrong.
I think we've clarified quite well the positions, all three
Okay.
candidates on that issue. The next question is to you, Mr. Demsky. We've been asking this at all our debates because it really is an unusual year in presidential politics. We have two nominees that have over 50% negatives, because I think may be unprecedented since we've been polling. So we've been asking our candidates what they plan to do, who they plan to support as president, whether it's going to be the nominee of their party or some other decision. So we'll give you the first chance on that, Mr. Demsky.
And what a chance it is. No, so on the Republican side, we had maybe even an unprecedented number of choices to make in the presidential primary. And Donald Trump was not my first, second, or even third choice out of that group of people. But even my 17th or 18th choice, in my opinion, is a far better one than entrusting a person like Hillary Clinton in the White House. People who are proponents of hers want to cite her experience in public service, so let's take a closer look at that briefly. And we can start with her position as Secretary of State. When she came into that office, the State Department was set to sanction Ericsson Phones for selling telecom equipment illegally to Iran. So when faced with that, what does a company like Ericsson Phones do? Well, in their case, they, for the first time in the history of their company, decided to sponsor a speech that took about 20 minutes, and at the end of which they deposited $750,000 into the Clinton Foundation Fund for Bill Clinton to come and speak for 20 minutes. 7 days later, literally a week after that, the State Department reversed its position and recommended that no action be taken against Ericsson and that they should police themselves. Since this is being cast people at home, feel free to go out and look up my information. You're ostensibly already on the computer. Take the extra step and look at it yourself. And we can go further with another example of where a group of Canadian businessmen had accumulated about 20% of this nation's uranium deposits. They wanted to sell those deposits to Russia, but that sale would have required State Department approval. So what do? Well, they deposit $145 million into the Clinton Foundation Fund, and voila, the State Department signs off on that deal, and now Russia is in control of 20% of this nation's uranium deposits. Those are not the only two examples. Granted, they are two of the most striking and stark examples, but this is the record of her experience and how she is clearly willing to sell the influence of her office as Secretary of State. I cannot ever support her being anywhere near the White House. So I will be voting for Donald Trump. And obviously people are free to do what they will, but these are things I think were important for people to know, and like I said, to go research for themselves.
Thank you. Bonnie Hong next.
Well, I'm the only person on this panel right now that's lucky enough not to have to say whether I'm supporting my party's nominee. So that leaves me free to just say exactly what I'm very comfortable running as a petitioning candidate because I could not actually support either one of those two candidates.
Can you tell who you will be supporting, if anyone?
It's one of the others. I will probably be voting for Jill Stein.
Okay, the Green Party candidate. All right, thank you. And Emmett Riley.
Thank you. My support will be with the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton. I was a supporter of Bernie Sanders when he ran and primaried her, and I will continue to support the Democratic nominee because I'm a Democrat. I don't leave a party. I don't change parties. I stick with whom I chose to be with.
All right. Everyone on the record on that. The next question is from Claire Bissett, and it's to Ms. Hung.
Okay. The state in the past legislative session exempted baseball stadiums in Hartford and New Britain from the 10% admissions tax, sales tax on a ticket price. And Norwich City Council voted unanimously last week, 2 weeks ago, to pursue equal treatment for Norwich Dodd Stadium to help pay for needed repairs, updates. The stadium is now 22 years old, needs capital improvements, needs some major items. And they feel they've been treated unfairly. The stadium was built on target, under budget, $10 million, not $100 million.
Right.
And they got left out. How do you feel about that exemption, given the state's economic situation?
Yeah, and I find that it's not just with the stadium that we get ignored. There's a bulletin that was just put out by the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities that really talks about the disproportionate burden that larger communities have. And yet there are only 4 cities that are mentioned, and not one of those cities is east of the Connecticut River, and which is not a surprise, I don't think, to, again, anybody in this room. This area is always ignored, being the largest municipal center in southeastern Connecticut. We do not seem to have any recognition out of Hartford when it comes to being treated fairly. In comparison, okay, we may not have the same population density that Waterbury has, or that Hartford has, or that one of the other 2 communities that are mentioned in the report. However, we still have the exact same issues in Norwich. They talked about, the poverty rate in Bridgeport and Hartford being, 31%. Well, Norwich is I think that the median income they talked about was about 26%, 23%. Norwich, it's 28%. It's 28. I'm getting all of my figures mixed up. I apologize. My point is that we do have the same urban problems that Bridgeport or Hartford have. We become a center of attraction for a number of different immigrant groups. Our poverty level in Norwich is extremely high. I do have the figures written down, and I can pull them out for you, but it is comparable to Hartford and Bridgeport and Waterford, and Waterbury. So for the state to always only point out everything west of the river that is in need of assistance because of what the economy has done, and always continually ignore what happens in eastern Connecticut, is part of the problem. And it's part of our, I think, representation problem. It's not that I think that our representatives or senators in the past have not tried to shout loud enough about why are we not being included in these issues when they affect us so drastically? Why is it just convenient to ignore the entire state east of the Connecticut River?
All right, Representative Riley, the question went back in particular to the fact that the stadium in Norwich did not get the same treatment on the exemption to the ticket tax that stadiums in Hartford and New Britain. And while you're answering that, I was wondering why didn't you make sure that legislation included Norwich in its stadium?
Certainly. First of all, I'm proud to say that I was a member of the Norwich Baseball Stadium Authority for 6 or 7 years. And they do a wonderful job there. That authority, it's, as you can ask many of the members, it's the authority with no authority, because they cannot do anything without the approval of the city council. When Dodd Stadium was built, the city of Norwich was given about $2 million worth of state money. Neither of these stadiums in Hartford or Bridgeport were given that kind of money. When this came up, we had discussions. They were allowed, and we gave the ability for the city of Norwich to put a 5% or a 5% tax on tickets coming into the stadium. So they do have the ability to tax individual ticket goers to games and functions at the stadium. The other thing I would ask is that with regard to that stadium, I would say to any individual with the day or any publication that would like to research and look at what that individual that owns that baseball team is doing. Is he paying his rent on time? And he is not. He has been in the rears many, many times. It is one of the reasons, and I feel very bad about this, having to get off that stadium authority because this individual was not paying his rent. So why would we give that kind of a break to an individual that does not pay his rent?
Okay. Mr. Demsky.
So we are talking about a 10% tax forgiveness, essentially, right?
Claire, could you just make sure we get the question
They
clarified?
don't want to remove the tax. They want to divert the revenue from the tax to cover the capital improvements needed to the stadium rather than turning over the money to the state.
Mm-hmm. So it seems to me that if we're talking about stadiums of essentially on an equal playing field, pardon the pun, that Dodd Stadium should have access to the same benefits as the other two stadiums. But quite frankly, it's an issue that I have not looked deeply into. So I would need to do that before rendering a more informed opinion. But it does, to me, seem to smack of another form of crony capitalism, like we saw with the Sikorsky deal, where the government, state government, is picking winners and losers. We're going to give a deal to this company, but we're not going to give a deal to this company over here. We're going to give this benefit to two stadiums, minor league stadiums in the state, but not to this other one over here. So on its face, it seems to me something that Dodd Stadium should have the same benefit of.
Ms. Hong, he raised the point of the Sikorsky deal, a $220 million incentive package that was negotiated by the Malloy administration, approved by the legislature overwhelmingly, and Representative Riley was in favor, I believe.
Without them asking for all the additional
your position on that deal specifically, and on the state providing incentives to try to keep businesses or relocate them here to Connecticut.
I don't think that has worked. And I don't think that when you look at other states, I mean, one of the things that is you hear constantly is Connecticut is such a high-tax state, that's why companies won't come here. Compare our taxes to Massachusetts, to California. We have major states with higher tax rates that are doing substantially better during this whole recession. And I think that that approach to business in the state of Connecticut doesn't work. I think that when you look at something like Connecticut Now, Connecticut 500, the goals that those groups have for creating jobs, it's not by giving out more of our bonding money to very profitable corporations that should not need any assistance from the state or the federal government. What does the people that do need assistance? There's a reason why GM moved to Massachusetts. Again, it was because of what Massachusetts is doing.
Do you mean?
I'm GE.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's what they're doing. They're developing their own Silicon Valley type hub of technology. It's a technology hub that's very impressive. Their venture clubs that they do up in Boston from MIT it gets a lot of people involved. So you're looking at a different approach to how do you develop good jobs in your state. The states that are doing well are those that are actually taking innovation and really promoting it, doing everything they can to encourage new entrepreneurs, not old billionaires.
All right, I want to hear from Representative Riley. It sounds like both your opponents disagreed with that incentive deal, if I heard correctly, and sort of with the concept in general. You voted in favor. What was your argument? Why did you do so?
It's not an argument. I would say the reason I did it is to save jobs in the state of Connecticut. These two individuals speak about saving jobs, creating jobs, and this will create or save close to 8,000 or save close to 6,000, create another 2,000 jobs. The supply chain alone for this program will provide $350 million a year in the state of Connecticut. These are astronomical numbers. And I'll also say that the state of Connecticut, to play in the big boy game, the big person game of national politics, national business relations, you have to do these things. The state of Washington gave out billions and billions of dollars. The state of California gives out billions and billions of dollars to these individuals, corporations, so that they will stay and create jobs in their states. The state of Massachusetts did it to us. It's a game that you must be involved in and you must play in to be able to continue to grow the economy and grow the jobs and save the jobs that you have in the state of Connecticut. It was a no-brainer. It doesn't affect our area, but I was glad to support it for those that live in the other part of the state. And one of the things that you need to do when you're in the legislature is be able to support other initiatives that may not help your town or your district, so that maybe down the road when you have an individual specific job program or a health program or whatever it may be, that those individuals that you help support in the General Assembly for their position and their jobs, they'll do the same for you. So it's ability to communicate and work between both what you believe in and how you believe in and what you need to do to make sure things happen correctly in the state. It's a large program that will save a lot of jobs and create and keep a lot of small businesses in business.
I want to give Mr. Demsky one last chance on this one. To react to your representative's comment that you would have let those jobs walk out of the state.
Right. Well, so first of all, I'm not one for the you scratch my back, I scratch yours, politics as usual thing that, frankly, most of the electorate is fed up with. I mean, that's why you see a candidate like Donald Trump be given rise to, because people are fed up with those types of arrangements. And one thing that I would caution about is setting up a moral hazard of as Ms. Hong said, this deal was given without them asking. How long is it before companies learn that they can ask and probably get these types of deals? Now we are square in the middle of exactly what I was talking about earlier, which is the state government picking winners and losers and deciding who they're going to give a package to and who they're not. And by the way, we don't have the money to be doling these packages out to people. You can say that it's we're giving out $220 million as a package, and it's going to bring in $300 million. What if it doesn't? That remains to be seen. And I think that in that deal, is it a net loss? Probably not. It probably is a net gain, but there's a long-term effect of looking to grant deals like that. I think that we are much better served. There is another way, which once again is control spending, reduce taxes, reduce regulations, create an environment that's conducive to business, all business, staying here, employing people, and expanding the economy the way that other states do. You look at Texas, Wisconsin, North Carolina. I mean, there are plenty of states where they're adding jobs in an economy that nationwide is not good. So why don't we look to those states and try to mirror what they're doing? If a deal like that is good for Sikorsky, why is it not good in a broader sense for all business?
All right. Very good. With that, believe it or not, our hour is just about up, but we will move to...
We don't get the extra half-hour time?
What's that extra half-hour time?
For the third candidate.
No, afraid not. People only have an hour for their lunch break, so we're going
Fair
to.
enough.
But we will be having more debate. So we're going to go to a final statement. Everyone gets a minute. We'll try to hold you to that. So be forewarned, and we'll start with Ms. Hong.
Okay. I think generally people have lost faith in our government, not just our federal government, but our state and sometimes even our local governments, for being able to do the right thing and really protect us and manage what we think are the important aspects of our life that is in their control. On the state level, I think that the budget, our economy, our jobs are all basically influenced, and the success of all of that is really dependent on how much. It's not going to be in the spending. We've cut so much spending. I wish I knew where they could see more spending cuts coming from. I see nowhere where the state can cut much more than they have. I guess I'm determined to go to Hartford and do what is right for both the people and the citizens of Norwich and the state.
Thank you. Next up is Representative Riley.
Thank you, and thank you to the day for holding this lunchtime meeting. I appreciate it. I think it's a very good opportunity for us to get our voices heard. My parents instilled in myself and my brothers that to be part of a community is to be involved. I've chosen to do that. I'm seeking my third term. I will continue to work for the city of Norwich and making sure that their best vision is put forward at the state of Connecticut. If you look at my candidacy, you won't find another, I believe, candidate in the state of Connecticut that has the endorsements from the Working Party and CBIA. That shows my ability to work between the lines, between business, between Republicans, between Democrats, and making sure what needs to be done in the correct fashion is done for the city of Norwich, and I thank them.
All right, thank you. And last, Rob Dempsky.
So once again, the central point and problem that the state is facing right now is the budget. Everything stems from that. I've said it a few times. I'll say it again. We are spending too much money. We need to find ways to reduce the state budget. That will allow us in time to hopefully lower the tax burden on individuals and businesses and create an environment that's more conducive to business expanding, creating opportunity, and creating jobs in the state. We were a little bit contentious about the minimum wage, but I hope we can all agree that the very best minimum wage is too many jobs and not enough workers. And we're trending in the opposite direction right now. So we need to do what we have to do to reverse that trend and once again create an environment in Connecticut where business can flourish and people can succeed and prosper and have opportunity. So that's what I intend to do when I'm elected.
All right, thank you very much, and thank all our candidates. That concludes today's discussion. And remind everyone, make sure you vote November 8th. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.